I sniff the pillow because it's the only thing left that still smells like her at night. I don't know why I do it. Maybe I'm trying to remember what she used to be, who she used to be, before I realized everything was a lie. There's a faint trace of her shampoo, something floral, mixed with my own sweat. My breathing is shallow. The pillow feels cold against my face, like it's already forgotten how to hold her warmth. It's pathetic, I think, but I keep inhaling anyway, standing there in the dim light of our bedroom, my mind circling around the memory of her touch. In the corner of my vision, I see the empty side shelf in the bathroom through the open door. We used to keep spare towels there. Once, there were lotions, maybe an extra toothbrush for guests, or a scented candle she liked when we took baths together. Now, it's bare. I don't even recall clearing it out. It must have happened slowly, each item disappearing as some part of us withered away. I set the pillow back down and stare at the bed, at the rumpled sheets, and the dent that still marks where she slept. This room hasn't felt like home for a while. The overhead light flickers once, a cold yellow glow settling in. My reflection in the dresser mirror looks unfamiliar. Sunken eyes, hair graying near the temples, shoulders slightly hunched as though bracing for another blow. I never realized how quietly a person can disintegrate until now. That's the funny thing. You get older, you settle into your routines, and you think you know how life works. Then in a single moment, everything breaks. Outside, I hear a car honk, and my heart clenches. I think it might be her, returning from wherever she's been. But the sound fades, and I'm alone again. It's better this way, I tell myself. Silence is easier to manage than false laughter. I walk out, slow steps on the hardwood floor, heading for the kitchen. I see the table, where we once sat for Sunday breakfasts, where we balanced the checkbook, where we tried to teach our son multiplication. Everything is the same as always, except that the air feels hollow now. The little family portrait on the wall stares at me. I see my own face, forced into a polite smile, her face leaning against me, our son in between. It looks so harmless from a distance. A man, a woman, a boy. But illusions can be as thick as a steel door. I remember the day I found out. The moment. The shift in my own reflection. It was 2 months ago, on a late Thursday afternoon. She didn't notice I was home early from a meeting. I'd left work with a pounding headache and wanted to lie down. Simple as that. I opened the door to our bedroom quietly, thinking maybe she was napping. Instead, I heard muffled sounds, an unfamiliar voice, a strained breath. The door was half open, and there they were. There's no neat way to say it. She was with him, a man I'd never seen before. The curve of his back, her hands on his skin. My mind froze, my chest tightened like a vice. Their bodies moved with an intimacy that felt both unreal and brutally concrete. I can't describe exactly how I felt. It was like the floor melted beneath me. I swallowed a bitter wave that threatened to come out as a shout, or a sob, or a laugh, I'm not sure which. I can't recall how long I stood there. Could have been seconds, could have been hours. I only remember my hands turning cold and my vision narrowing until all I saw was them. The silhouette of betrayal spelled out in sweat and stolen gasps. At one point, she opened her eyes and saw me. She froze, tried to speak, but nothing came out. Neither of us moved. I wish I could say I stormed in, threw him off her, demanded an explanation. But all I did was back away. I left the house silently, numb. My chest felt hollow, my breath shallow, as though I were trying to inhale underwater. I heard him whisper something urgent to her. I heard her stifled cry. I didn't care about the words. I just wanted to escape, to not exist. Sometimes that's how it happens. You discover your life is a farce, and your brain chooses numbness over rage. At least for a while. Since then, I haven't truly slept. Sure, I close my eyes, drift off for a few hours, but real rest is gone. I spend the nights listening to every tick of the clock, every creak in the walls. I imagine them together. I imagine them laughing about me, mocking my ignorance. Then I wonder if she regrets it, if she feels anything like the scorching emptiness I do. And I realize I don't know who she is at all. Maybe I never did. I grip the back of a chair, feeling the tension in my fingers. A wave of black humor passes through me. I think about how perfect everything used to look, like those neatly ironed shirts I wore to work every day. Crisp, respectable. But inside, the threads were already unraveling. Even the memory of our wedding day feels like some cosmic joke. We said vows about fidelity and love. I said them with all my heart. Maybe she did too, in her own way. Yet here we are. 2 days after I caught them, a letter arrived. A DNA test. My teenage son had been curious about family ancestry. He'd joked about possible Viking blood. He wanted to see if we had any unique heritage. I gave him the okay, but the results came in, and they confirmed the worst. That boy, my son, my only child, carries another man's DNA. Not mine. Part of me wanted to laugh in disbelief. The world spun. She said she didn't know. She insisted it wasn't certain, that the test must be wrong. But we both knew the truth. I can't describe the feeling. It's like your soul empties out. You realize everything you've built stands on quicksand. The house, the marriage, the future, none of it is real. That's when I started ironing her clothes every evening. Her blouses, her jeans, even the delicate black lingerie I found at the bottom of the hamper. I did it slowly, methodically, each stroke of the iron pressing the memory of that day deeper into my brain. I told her I wanted to keep up appearances, that I would keep the house in order. She asked me if I forgave her. I only said that I wasn't seeking revenge, just living in a way that made her suffer from my silence. And she did. She wrung her hands, hovered near me, searching my face for a sign of absolution or rage. I gave her nothing. Numbness is a kind of revenge, one that lingers like a constant dripping faucet. Now in the kitchen, I pick up a glass from the sink, stare at the water spots, then set it down again. The quiet hum of the refrigerator is the only thing keeping me company. Days stretch out like desert highways with no end in sight. I recall how the last time we spoke with any warmth was months ago, on a hiking trip. She had worn a white shirt, and I teased her about how easily she'd get it dirty. She laughed and kissed my cheek. It seems like it was a different couple, living a different life. At some point, I moved toward acceptance, if that's the right word. The next day, I confronted her in the living room, more like I stood there, and she tried to piece together an explanation. She broke down, said she felt lonely, neglected. She met Dan. He's a freelance consultant, younger than me, bolder, full of risk and flair. At some local event I never bothered to ask about. They started having coffee, then lunch, then it snowballed. She didn't plan it, or so she claimed, but apparently, they'd been seeing each other for a while. The timeline is fuzzy in my mind. I didn't ask for details. I just stared at her face, noticing wrinkles around her eyes I hadn't seen before. She waited for me to shout, to curse, to blame her. But I just said, sure, and walked away. She followed me, tried to touch my arm. I brushed her off. I told her I needed time. Inside, I felt like a stunned animal, licking a fresh wound. That's what I did for weeks, silently suffered, avoided contact, avoided any direct confrontation that would let her see how deeply I was bleeding. Even with the knowledge that my son isn't biologically mine, I couldn't fully rage. He's still my son. The years we spent together, the memories, none of that is undone by genetics. And yet, every time I look at him, I see the question mark. Does he sense something is off? He asked about the test results. I told him the kit must have been faulty or mislabeled. He believed me, or he pretended to, wanting to avoid the tension that's built up in this house. My wife, Catherine, she didn't correct the story. She nodded along, eyes lowered. It's been a slog. People at the office keep telling me I look tired. My sister called, said I sound different on the phone. asked if everything's all right. I said yes, I'm just a bit busy. She doesn't know about the affair, about the test, about any of it. I can't handle pity. Pity would break me. One morning, Catherine cornered me by the laundry room. She tried to rest her hand on my shoulder again, a gentle but desperate gesture. She whispered if I would ever truly forgive her. I turned, gave her a thin half-smile, and said, "It's not about forgiveness." She waited for more, but I walked away. That's what I've been doing, walking away. I slip into black humor sometimes, joking internally about how if she wants to lie in another man's arms, at least she should do it far from me. That's the best I can do. The day came when I found the nerve to approach Dan, her lover. I discovered he worked with a small startup downtown. I didn't want a big scene, but I needed to see his face up close, to understand the man who destroyed my marriage. Or maybe I destroyed it first, by not seeing what was wrong. Anyway, I went to his office building around lunchtime. I spotted him near the entrance, checking his phone. He was a bit younger than I expected, mid-30s maybe. He wore a neat button-down shirt, stylish slacks. He looked confident, relaxed, like a man who never doubted his worth. He had no idea who I was at first, just gave me a courteous nod. Then I told him my name. He blinked, face turning pale. We stood near the sidewalk. People in suits rushed by, not noticing the tension in the air. He opened his mouth, but no words came. I said something about how he'd done quite a job on my family. He tried to apologize, to say it's complicated. I held up a hand to stop him. I felt no desire to hear it. No desire to break his jaw, either. Strange that. Part of me expected to punch him, but I didn't want the energy wasted. It was more painful to see him squirm, eyes flicking to the ground. Maybe he expected me to lash out, or maybe to weep. I did neither. I just stared, letting the silence weigh heavy until he finally mumbled something about how it wasn't planned. It just happened. That's when I gave a small laugh, the black humor creeping in. I told him I hoped he enjoyed it. Then I left. Slow steps, back into the city crowd. When I got home, Catherine was in the kitchen, looking anxious. She asked if I was all right, said she sensed something was off. I told her I went to see Dan. She nearly dropped the dish she was drying. She asked if we fought. I shook my head. Quiet. She wanted details. I only said, "We stood." He talked. I listened. She pressed me for more, but eventually realized I wouldn't give it. She was trembling like she feared what I might do next. Time passed in slow motion after that. Each day felt like wading through thick mud. I woke up, avoided conversation, went to work, came back, ironed her clothes, tried to watch some late-night show, failed to laugh. Sleep was a battlefield of twisted dreams. I'd see them in bed, or I'd see my son asking me why I wasn't his real dad. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, hearing my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Catherine sometimes called out from the other side of the bed, voice uncertain. I never responded. One night, she found me standing by the washing machine, running my hand over the fabric of her white shirt. It was the same kind she wore when we went to the glacier, that trip where the sun hit the ice so harshly we had to squint the whole time. She asked what I was doing. I remember turning to her, saying something along the lines of, "Nothing. Just memorizing the texture." She looked close to tears. I wanted to say more, but what words could fix any of this? She tried to approach me with an apology again. This time, I let her speak. She said she was sorry for everything. For the deceit, for letting things go so far. She tried to explain she never meant to hurt me, that she just felt stifled, bored, as though her life was slipping by. I guess Dan represented an escape. She insisted she still loved me. She wanted us to stay together, to rebuild. I asked her quietly, "And what about him?" She stayed silent. That told me enough. Every day, the bitterness in my chest grew heavier. I'd see them in my mind, tangled in sheets, with her moaning his name. Then I'd hear her telling me she wants to fix things. Some nights, when she was asleep, I'd stand at the bedroom door and watch her. She looked older, lines etched into her face that didn't used to be there, maybe from guilt or fear. I'd catch myself wondering if I should just walk away, vanish, let them have whatever they want. But I couldn't do it. Part of me was stuck in the place where I believed in second chances. Another part wanted her to ache the way I ached. My friends at work started inviting me out for drinks, noticing my tension. I refused, not wanting to explain. People sense when something's off, but they rarely press too hard. So I remained alone with my thoughts. I'd sit at my desk during lunch hour, rereading old emails from my wife. Short messages about errands, grocery lists. They felt so mundane now, like relics from a simpler past. Sometimes I'd catch myself almost laughing at how ordinary we once were. Grocery runs, movie nights, dropping our son off at soccer practice. One weekend, we were supposed to visit my father a few hours away. He wanted us all together. But Catherine suggested maybe she should stay behind, to give me space. I told her, "I'd rather you come. At least we can maintain appearances." She visibly flinched at the coldness in my voice, but she nodded. Our son seemed relieved. He hates tension, doesn't understand half of what's happening, but senses it. That entire drive, the silence was like a living thing. My father welcomed us, oblivious to the storm beneath our polite conversation. Catherine tried to help my stepmother in the kitchen, but she looked like a ghost in a house she no longer recognized. I excused myself, said I was taking a walk, ended up sitting by an old tree for an hour, staring at a family of birds nesting in the branches. A strange envy crept up on me. Envy for creatures that mate, build a nest, and never doubt each other's loyalty. After that visit, Catherine started sleeping in the guest room sometimes. She said she didn't want to upset me, but I think it was also to hide her tears. Maybe part of her thought I'd relent if she gave me space. Instead, I just felt emptier, drifting further away from the woman I once thought I knew better than anyone. A few days later, the final blow arrived in the form of a quiet conversation with my son. I was in the backyard, trying to fix a loose fence board. He came out, hands in pockets, eyes downcast. He asked if I was mad about the DNA results. I forced a half smile, told him it was probably just a mistake. But he's smart. He pressed. "Are you sure, Dad?" I heard the wobble in his voice. He needed reassurance. I wanted to scream that I wasn't his father, but I couldn't do that to him. So I said something about how we're father and son, no matter what, that biology doesn't change memories or love. He exhaled, told me how thankful he was for everything I taught him. Fishing, building a campfire, all those fatherly things. He had tears in his eyes when he said it. I wrapped my arm around him, feeling a rush of savage protectiveness. He's still my boy, no matter whose DNA runs through his veins. That moment shattered something inside me. I realized I was ready to leave. Not him, but this entire charade of a marriage, because staying in this house was eating me alive. In the following days, I planned my departure silently, focusing on the details. What to pack, where to go. I'd always been drawn to the forest, the quiet hush of trees. We once took a family trip to a national park in Oregon. I remember feeling at peace among the tall pines. I decided I'd disappear into a small cabin I knew I could rent month to month, away from the city, away from memories. Catherine had no idea, or maybe she sensed a shift in my energy, because she started hovering again, cooking me dinner she thought I liked, leaving me notes asking if I needed anything. I read them, but I didn't respond. The words felt hollow. She tried to fix the unfixable with recipes and apologies. At work, I gave notice that I'd be taking some personal leave. My manager didn't pry. It was easier to do than I'd expected. By that point, I'd grown numb to surprises. Catherine saw me packing a few boxes in the garage but said nothing. Maybe she was too afraid to ask. The air between us was thick with unspoken truths. Then, the night before I left, she confronted me for the last time. It was late, nearly midnight. She found me in the living room, sitting on the couch with no lights on, just the flicker of a lamp from outside. She stood there in her robe, looking drained. She whispered that she loved me, that she couldn't stand the silence anymore. Her voice shook. She moved closer, sat next to me, tried to hold my hand. I let her, but I felt nothing but a dull ache. She said she'd end things with Dan completely, that she'd already told him it was over, that she was willing to do whatever it took to fix this. I nodded, but I think we both knew it was too late. She asked if I still loved her. That question hung in the air so long it was almost a presence itself. I didn't know how to answer. I think, in some twisted way, I do still love her. But I also resent her, blame her for shattering my identity. All I managed was a faint sigh. Then I mumbled something about how it doesn't matter anymore. She begged me not to leave. I closed my eyes, feeling a sting behind my eyelids, and said I had to go. I used black humor to soften the blow, something about how a real man needs to chop wood in the wilderness to find his soul. She gave a bitter laugh, tears glistening. We both knew it was a shield. The next morning, before dawn, I loaded my truck. I took enough clothes, my sleeping bag, a few essentials, left behind most of my suits, my work gear. On the kitchen counter, I left no note, no farewell. I listened to the house's silence one last time, remembering how it used to echo with laughter, with arguments, with genuine living. Then I slipped out the door. I didn't say goodbye to my son. I should have, but I was afraid if I looked into his eyes, I'd break, and I might never leave. And I needed to leave. My heart felt like lead. The drive to the cabin was a blur. I turned the radio off. The road stretched in front of me like a bad dream. Rain started to fall halfway there, tapping on the windshield in a steady, mournful rhythm. I let it fill the silence. When I arrived, the cabin was just as I remembered, rustic, a little damp. Logs stacked outside for the fireplace. I unloaded my boxes, set them down inside. The musty smell of old wood and closed windows pressed in. I opened a window, letting the cold forest air swirl around me. For a moment, I could almost breathe freely. I spent the next few days settling in. No phone calls to Catherine, no texts. She tried calling once, but I didn't pick up. Eventually, she stopped. Probably realized I needed space, or maybe she was with Dan. The thought no longer sent me into a spiral. I'd embraced the numbness. That's what I'd become. A man who'd lost the ability to feel beyond a muted ache. The forest around the cabin was thick, tall pines and firs, a carpet of needles that muffled my footsteps. Each morning, I'd take a walk, an axe slung over my shoulder. I'd find deadwood, chop it up, haul it back. Sweat and the smell of sap coated me until the only thing I knew was the physicality of labor. In the evenings, I'd make a small fire, stare into the flames, and let my mind wander. Sometimes, I'd reflect on my life. The day we got married, the day our son was born, or so I thought. I realized I didn't know who I was anymore. The illusions that sustained me had crumbled. One drizzly afternoon, I heard a vehicle on the gravel road outside. My heart tightened. I peered out the window and saw a familiar car. Catherine's. She stepped out, carefully, looking around the gloomy clearing as though I might jump out at her. I felt a wave of conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to open the door. Part of me wanted to pretend I wasn't there. In the end, I let her knock once, then I answered. She stood on the small porch, a light coat over her shoulders, hair damp from the mist. She looked worn, older than her 43 years. Her eyes darted to me, searching for some sign of acceptance. We stood in silence. Then she softly asked if she could come in. I hesitated but stepped aside. Inside, she took in the Spartan cabin, the few boxes, the faint smell of burning wood. She said she missed me, that our son missed me. She tried to hand me a letter. Some attempt at explaining her feelings, I guess. I didn't read it. I set it on the table. We talked in fragments. She said she'd cut Dan out of her life. She wanted to build a new foundation, even if it meant therapy or moving or whatever it took. She apologized again, tears at the corners of her eyes. I stared at the flicker of the fireplace. My voice came out low, almost monotone. I said I believed she was sorry, but I also believed she was sorry she got caught. She winced. Her lip trembled. She asked if there was any chance for us. I leaned my head against the wall, exhausted. Told her I was hollow, that the man she knew no longer existed. She said she didn't accept that we had too many years together, too many memories. I gave a short, dark laugh, the black humor crawling up my throat. I told her sometimes memories are just that, shadows of a life that never was. She pressed closer, tried to place a hand on my knee. I stiffened. It was as if the tension had to snap, one way or another. She tried to embrace me, to find some physical closeness. For a heartbeat, I caught the scent of her perfume and felt a flicker of the old familiarity, the shape of her body that I once knew better than my own. Then I remembered her with him, the sweat, the moans, the betrayal. My stomach churned. She must have sensed my recoil. Her hand dropped to her side. Tears finally spilled down her cheeks. I let her cry, neither consoling her nor telling her to stop. It was a silent, suffocating kind of crying, the kind that leaves you drained. When she finished, her eyes were raw, mascara smudged. She asked if I hated her. I told her I invite her. She frowned, not understanding. I said I invite her ability to cry, to let it out, while I felt stuck in this emotional limbo. She looked at me helplessly. An hour later she left, said she'd give me space. I stood on the porch, watched her car disappear down the gravel road. Then the trees closed in again, the hush of the forest enveloping me. I felt a wave of emptiness, deeper than before. For weeks, I continued my solitary routine. My phone was mostly off, except for occasional calls with my boss about the indefinite leave. My son tried a few times to reach me, but I always told him I needed more time. It pained me to keep him at arm's length, but I couldn't face him properly, not when every word made me question what fatherhood really meant. In that isolation, I tried to rediscover myself. I wrote in an old notebook, random thoughts about life, about illusions. Sometimes I'd scrawl nonsense or half-formed jokes that only made sense to me. The black humor found its way onto the pages. Lines like, "At least my half-empty cabin can't cheat on me." I'd laugh bitterly to myself. If anyone else read it, they'd think I was losing my mind. I started working on the cabin, fixing creaky floorboards, mending the roof. Physical activity was a salvation, a focus that replaced the swirling chaos in my head. At night, I'd stare at the flames in the fireplace, imagining the life I once had. The dull ache would swell, but tears never came. My tear ducts felt as though they dried up the moment I saw her with him. Then, one evening, I heard a sound outside. Footsteps on the porch. My heart hammered. I opened the door, expecting Catherine again. Instead, I found my son. He'd gotten a ride from a friend, found the address in my desk. He stood there, looking hesitant, almost a man himself now, caught between adolescence and the responsibilities life was throwing at him. I could see the confusion in his eyes. He asked if he could stay the night. He had a small backpack. I nodded, stepping aside. We didn't hug, but there was a tension in the air that spoke of the distance we'd allowed to grow. Inside, I offered him a seat by the fire. He looked around the cabin, asked if I'd built it myself. I said no, just rented it. He chuckled, said it was kind of cool, in a rough way. We danced around the real topic for a while, talking about his soccer games, about school. Eventually, he cleared his throat, asked me point blank, "Did Mom do something bad?" I glanced away, not sure how to handle it. He said he wasn't stupid. He heard rumors, or maybe read some texts. He mentioned seeing some messages from Dan on her phone once. My chest constricted. I told him, in as few words as possible, that your mother and I have issues, that sometimes grown-ups hurt each other. He looked at me as if I were evading the truth. He asked if he was the reason I left. That question cut me like a knife. I told him absolutely not, that he would always be my son. I saw relief in his eyes, but also sadness. He asked if I was coming home soon. I said I didn't know. He stared at the fire a while, then said he missed me. My voice cracked when I replied I missed him too. That night, we shared the modest space. I gave him my bed, took the couch. I couldn't sleep much, listening to his breathing, remembering how I used to read him stories when he was small. Everything had changed, but that memory still felt pure. In the morning, he said he had to head back, that Mom would be worried. I offered to drive him, but he insisted a friend would pick him up. Before he left, he turned to me and said, "I don't care what the DNA says. You're my dad." Then he was gone. The forest felt colder after that. In my solitude, I felt every regret sharpen. I realized punishing Catherine with silence wasn't just punishing her. It was punishing him, punishing me. Yet the bitterness remained, coiled around my heart. More time passed. The color of the leaves changed. Autumn turned the pines a richer hue. The days grew shorter. I collected firewood like a hermit preparing for an endless winter. Catherine reached out a few times, left voicemails. I didn't answer. Dan never contacted me. Maybe he knew better, or maybe Catherine had really ended things with him. I couldn't bring myself to care. My manager told me eventually that I needed to decide if I was returning to work or resigning. I said I'd let him know. At night, I wrestled with the idea of revenge. Part of me wanted to hurt her the way she hurt me, but I also knew that was empty. Another part of me wanted to vanish, start a new life. But my son anchored me. He needed me, no matter whose DNA he carried. One bleak afternoon, I took a long hike into the heart of the forest. The sky was gray, drizzling a fine mist. My boots sank into wet earth with each step. I passed an overlook with a steep drop where you could see miles of trees rolling into the distance. I stood there, the wind biting my cheeks, thinking about how easily I could slip. For a moment, the thought crossed my mind. What if I let go, ended this torment? But that was fleeting. Because in the distance, I remembered the face of my son, remembered how he needed me. I clenched my fists, turned, and trudged back to the cabin. By the time I returned, I was drenched, shivering. I built a fire, sat by it, warming my hands. My reflection in the cabin window was that of a man carved from sorrow, older than my 45 years. I realized I'd reached the limit of my retreat. Hiding out here wouldn't fix anything. Maybe I didn't want to fix it, but I couldn't live in purgatory forever. Something had to break. That night, I made a decision. I packed my few belongings back into boxes, loaded them into my truck. The next morning, I locked up the cabin, left the key under a rock as arranged with the landlord, and drove away without looking back. The forest receded in my rearview mirror. I felt a strange calm, as if I'd left a piece of my anguish behind in those dark woods. Back on the road, I headed for the city. Dusk was rolling in by the time I arrived at our suburban house, the one that had been a home once. Lights glowed in the windows. My heart pounded. I parked the truck, stepped onto the driveway. Catherine's car was there. My son's was too. I took a deep breath, walked to the front door, and let myself in. The warmth of the interior hit me first. The smell of dinner cooking, the faint hum of a TV. Catherine appeared in the hallway, eyes wide. She looked stunned, like she'd half expected never to see me again. My son rushed forward, hesitated, then hugged me. I hugged him back, feeling an ache behind my eyes. Catherine approached slowly, asking if I was back for good. I didn't answer. I just said I needed to talk to them both. We sat in the living room. Her on the couch, me in the armchair, our son on a small stool. The tension was palpable. The clock on the wall ticked each second like a judge presiding over us. I said I'd come home to put things in order, to decide how we move forward. She looked anxious, nodded. Our son glanced between us, worried. Over the following days, we tried counseling. The therapist asked about my anger, about Catherine's reasons, about the betrayal that infected our marriage. I spoke in a blunt, hollow voice. Catherine tried to articulate her guilt, her love, her remorse. The sessions were draining. Sometimes, after therapy, I'd drive around aimlessly, not wanting to go home. Each evening, I'd avoid the bedroom. I started sleeping in the guest room. Catherine respected that boundary but looked stricken every time I passed her in the hall. My son walked on eggshells. The house was a war zone of unspoken feelings. I remember coming across her white shirt folded on a chair in the laundry room one day. I stared at it for a long time. That garment symbolized so much. Purity turned inside out. I almost laughed, thinking of the irony. White as a sign of innocence. Eventually, Catherine told me that Dan had left town for a new consulting project. She said she wanted him gone from her life, that she realized it was a mistake from the start. I didn't respond, but I felt a flash of savage satisfaction. The man who once seemed so smug, so sure of himself, had fled, presumably bored or spooked by the mess he left behind. Good riddance, I thought, though it didn't ease my pain. As time wore on, I realized that staying in the house was slowly killing me. I was becoming a bitter shell of a person, my every interaction laced with cynicism. Catherine seemed determined to show me she cared, but the damage was too deep. I saw in her eyes a growing desperation, as though she knew she might lose me forever. Our son tried to maintain normalcy, focusing on school, but his eyes flickered with worry whenever he looked at us. One evening, Catherine cornered me in the living room again. She asked if we were going to finalize a divorce or try to truly reconcile. Her voice trembled as she spoke. I looked at the pictures on the mantel, wedding photos, family gatherings, and felt a deep sense of fatigue. The black humor rose in me again. I thought about how wedding photos are trophies of a moment that might never exist in spirit again. I told her I couldn't see a path to real reconciliation. She asked if there was something, anything, that could change that. I said I didn't know who I was anymore, let alone who she was. She looked devastated. She reminded me about our son, about our life, about the years we'd shared. I told her you can't unsee the truth. She asked if I wanted to move out for good. I shrugged. Then I said something about how I was done with illusions. That night, she slept on the couch, and I heard her softly sobbing through the walls. The next day, I found an apartment listing. A small place on the other side of town. Cheap, nothing fancy. I put down a deposit. Catherine asked if I was sure. I didn't answer. My mind was already made up. Our son, old enough to understand but not to fix anything, said he supported whatever made me less miserable. The heartbreak in his voice made me want to punch a wall. But I stayed silent. Shortly after, I packed up my essentials and left the house. I told Catherine we'd figure out visitation, that I'd still see our son, that I wasn't abandoning him. She said she understood, but her eyes were haunted. I think she finally grasped that our marriage was well and truly over, that no quiet apology would patch the holes. The betrayal sat too deep, like a root that choked all our shared soil. I moved into the apartment, a cramped one-bedroom space with outdated appliances. It suited me fine. The nights were lonely, but at least they were mine. I tried to forge a new routine. Get up, make coffee, go to work. I eventually returned to the office. My colleagues welcomed me back with gentle curiosity, but I shut down any personal questions. Day by day, I forced myself to function. Catherine texted me sometimes, updates about our son's soccer games or a reminder about the mortgage. We kept the house in both our names for now, uncertain how to divide assets. She asked if I'd be willing to do more counseling, if only to handle the divorce amicably. I reluctantly agreed, wanting to keep things civil for the sake of our son. We attended a few sessions, focusing on co-parenting. The therapist tried to delve into the affair, but each time, I clammed up. Catherine would talk about her regrets, how lonely she felt, and I'd stare at the floor. Nothing she said could erase the image seared into my brain. That day I came home early and saw them entwined. On weekends I'd pick up my son, take him out for burgers, maybe a movie. We never talked about the DNA test again, though it hung in the air. He avoided the subject, I avoided it, and we pretended we were father and son as always. Despite everything, we were forging a bond that stood outside biology. If nothing else, I had that. Months slipped by. The divorce papers were drafted. Catherine looked tired, as though she'd lost a war. She tried to bring up one final attempt at reconciliation, but I told her I was done. I said it softly, no anger, just finality. She teared up, nodded. We signed the paperwork. Just like that, our marriage of nearly 2 decades dissolved. The final hearing was scheduled, and we parted ways in the courthouse hallway with minimal words. She touched my arm, and I didn't pull away this time, but neither did I embrace her. A middle ground of sorrow. I walked outside, the cold wind hitting me, and for the first time in ages, I felt a shift. Not joy, not relief, but a sense that a chapter was closing. My life, this new solitary life, wasn't what I'd asked for, but it was mine to shape. I thought about black humor again, how maybe I should write a manual for men who discover their wives have been cheating for years. Step 1. Keep breathing. Step 2. Don't murder anyone. Step 3. Quietly unravel. A few days after that, Catherine called me, saying the final hearing date was set. She sounded calm, resigned. She also mentioned that Dan was gone for good, that she hadn't heard from him in months. She was seeing a therapist on her own, trying to salvage her sense of self. There was a trembling in her voice, a vulnerability I'd never heard before. Part of me pitied her, but the rest of me felt numb. I told her I hoped she found what she was looking for. She whispered a thank you, voice thick with tears. Our son spent alternating weekends with me, which eased the ache of loneliness somewhat. He was doing well in school, practicing guitar, talking about possibly going to college out of state. He seemed to sense that life could continue despite the fractured family. Sometimes we watched old movies in my apartment, eating popcorn, not talking about the past, just coexisting. On the day of the final hearing, Catherine and I sat before a judge, answered a few questions. Everything was clinical, procedural, just another statistic for the system. Afterward, I walked out of the courthouse, the decree in my hand. The wind was chilly. I glanced back once, saw Catherine with her lawyer, tears in her eyes. We didn't speak. My footsteps echoed on the marble floor as I left, a free but broken man. That night, I came home to my empty apartment. I flicked on the lights, stared at the bare walls. I felt an odd calm. I realized that bitterness can only take you so far, that eventually you stand at a crossroads. Keep living in anger, or move forward into the unknown. I still had regrets, still had wounds that might never fully heal, but I was done letting them define me. I brewed a cup of coffee at 8 p.m., sat on the sagging couch, and scrolled through my phone. A message from Catherine blinked on the screen. She said she was sorry again, that if I ever wanted to talk, she'd be there. I stared at the words, felt the heaviness in my chest, then turned off my phone. Days turned into weeks, then months. The routine of daily life slowly stitched over the gaping hole, though I'd often traced the scar. In quiet moments, I'd remember the day I found them in bed. I'd taste the old rage, the sorrow, the sense of betrayal that changed everything. I'd hear a mocking voice in my head telling me I was a fool for not seeing the signs, but I no longer let it drag me into despair. The mind can learn to survive after unimaginable pain. I never truly forgave Catherine. Not yet, anyway. Maybe someday I'll find room in my heart to set it aside. That's a story for another time. My son remains the link that keeps us in cautious contact. He's finishing high school soon, and I plan to be there at his graduation, no matter how awkward it might be to stand near Catherine. He's my son, DNA be damned. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I still wake up from dreams where I see them together, or see the letter with the DNA results, or see myself ironing her clothes while she watches in terror. My chest tightens, and I have to remind myself I'm in my apartment alone. I tell myself I'm not the same man I was. And maybe that's the hardest part. Realizing you can't go back, can't reclaim the illusions. One evening, months after the divorce, I found myself at my small kitchen table, a single lamp illuminating a stack of random papers. I picked up a piece of blank paper and started writing. I wrote about the day of the glacier, about the brightness of the sun on the ice, how she wore that white shirt. I remembered how I felt proud, content to have her in my life. That memory was still warm, a moment of real happiness. Then I wrote about the betrayal. My hand shook, but I kept going. Words spilled out, raw and jagged. By the time I finished, hours had passed, and I had tears on my cheeks for the first time since it happened. I folded those pages, tucked them into a drawer. They're still there, a testament to everything lost and everything survived. Perhaps that's how I live now, day by day, forging a new identity from the scraps. Sometimes I smile. Sometimes I make sarcastic remarks to myself about the cosmic joke. But I'm moving forward, step by halting step. I don't know if there's a moral to this story. Maybe it's that life goes on even when your foundation cracks. Maybe it's that betrayal changes you, but it doesn't have to destroy you. Or maybe it's just a cautionary tale. Pay attention to the small signs before they explode in your face. I'm not wise enough to say for sure. All I know is that I'm still breathing, still getting up every morning, and still refusing to be defined by her choices. Sometimes, late at night, I'll reach over to the empty side of my bed and remember how it felt to share space with someone I loved. That ache never fully goes away. Yet it's a small comfort to know I can endure it. I can function, even if a part of me remains broken. And in that quiet acceptance, there's a certain grim peace. Tonight, I sit here, finishing this reflection, letting the slow pace of my thoughts settle. My coffee's grown cold, the lamp flickers. Outside, the city hums, oblivious to my story. I take a breath, recalling the day I pressed my face into her pillow, searching for some hint of warmth, some final trace of her affection. I remember how hollow it felt. I remember how that hollowness became a kind of armor in the weeks that followed. And I realized that in the end, we're all just trying to make sense of the betrayals life throws at us, whether they come from a lover, a friend, or from within ourselves. But I am still here. I am not sure who I am now, but I'm alive. That has to be enough.